She came to return my hoodie, but ended up refusing to let it go. It was just another quiet evening. I had been scrolling through my phone, half listening to the hum of the city outside my window, when an unexpected knock interrupted the stillness. My first thought was that it must be a neighbor or a delivery, but the sound lingered, deliberate yet hesitant, as if whoever it was wasn't quite sure they belonged here. When I opened the door, she was standing there. A woman in her early 40s, radiating an effortless confidence that came not from showiness, but from the kind of self-assuredness only life experience can grant. She held something in her hands, my hoodie, crumpled but still warm. I noticed, almost immediately, how the dim light of the hallway caught in her hair, the subtle way a few loose strands curled around her face, softening the sharp angles of her jaw. Her smile was polite, but there was a hesitation in it, a pause that suggested she had lingered in front of the door longer than she meant to. "Hey," she said, her voice gentle, slightly husky, like a soft chord of music that lingers after the note ends. I found your hoodie. Thought I should return it." I gestured for her to come in, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the warmth of her presence, the kind that seemed to fill the small space of my apartment instantly, or maybe it was the sudden, inexplicable urge to prolong the moment. She stepped inside, and even the smallest movement, how she adjusted the hoodie in her hands, how her gaze flitted toward the couch and back, felt weighted with unspoken intent. As she handed me the hoodie, our fingers brushed. It was brief, almost accidental, but the touch carried a warmth that made me freeze just for a moment, heart tightening in a way that was entirely unexpected. I could feel the subtle tremor of her fingers, the gentle pressure as she released it, and for some reason, I found myself unwilling to let go immediately. She laughed softly, a sound that made the room feel both larger and more intimate at once. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, warm, comforting, and how it seemed to cling to her, lingering even as she shifted slightly. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, there was a flicker of something that didn't need words. Curiosity, maybe. Recognition. Something unspoken that hovered delicately between us. "I guess you didn't expect me," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not exactly," I admitted, though my words felt trivial compared to the quiet intensity of her gaze. There was something in the way she stood, poised yet slightly vulnerable, that made me acutely aware of the space between us, both the physical and the emotional. The hoodie, once just an object, had become a silent bridge, a reason for this fleeting intimacy, a reason for her presence here, unplanned yet somehow perfect. As she lingered by the doorway, I realized the evening had changed without my noticing. The city outside continued its hum, but in that small apartment, time slowed. Every glance, every pause, every almost touch seemed amplified, laden with curiosity, tension, and an unspoken connection neither of us were yet ready to name. It was just a hoodie. And yet, in that moment, it felt like everything. After the initial exchange of the hoodie, I thought she would leave. But she didn't. Instead, she lingered, standing near the doorway as though unsure whether to step back into the evening outside or step fully into the warmth of my apartment. Her presence filled the room, not loudly, but quietly, like sunlight spilling through a crack in the blinds, subtle, gentle, and impossible to ignore. "Mind if I stay for a bit?" she asked, almost hesitating at the words, as if admitting them aloud made them heavier than they should be. I nodded, my voice catching slightly, betraying my own unexpected desire for her company. She settled onto the couch, careful, deliberate, folding the hoodie neatly on her lap, though her hands kept brushing the fabric absent-mindedly. We began talking, but the conversation wasn't remarkable in itself, small talk about work, the weather, an upcoming event, but every pause carried weight. Every glance held meaning. She tilted her head slightly when she laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made me feel a little unsteady in the best way. I caught myself noticing details I hadn't before, the gentle curve of her neck, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, and the quiet warmth in her tone that seemed meant only for me. At one point, our hands brushed as she reached for a mug on the table. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but it lingered in the air between us. My palm felt the warmth of her skin, and I was suddenly acutely aware of how close she was. She didn't pull away immediately either, just let the touch hang there, as if testing the unspoken boundary. It was electric, silent, and entirely consuming. I found myself leaning slightly forward, drawn to her in ways I couldn't fully name. She mirrored me unconsciously, leaning a fraction closer, shifting her posture so that our shoulders almost touched. Each subtle movement carried meaning, a delicate dance neither of us had rehearsed but both were performing perfectly. There was a moment when she paused, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and our eyes met in a long, deliberate look. It said everything without words: curiosity, intrigue, and a hint of longing. The space between us seemed charged, yet perfectly safe, held in the delicate balance of mutual hesitation and quiet desire. The scent of her perfume mixed with the faint warmth of the hoodie, creating a sensory memory I knew I would carry with me long after she left. Even the quiet sounds of the city outside, the distant honk of a car, the soft murmur of a neighbor, faded into the background, replaced by the palpable intimacy of this moment. When she finally rose to leave, neither of us moved immediately. There was a shared reluctance in that pause, an acknowledgement that the evening had stretched into something unplanned but profoundly meaningful. Her hand brushed mine one last time as she handed back the hoodie, and I caught the slight squeeze, almost invisible, almost accidental, but unmistakable. It was a simple visit, a casual gesture, yet by the time she left, the room felt emptier and somehow charged with possibility. I realized then that closeness wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it was measured in glances, touches, and the way two people occupied the same space, quietly, and completely aware of each other. After she left that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling her presence had left behind. The hoodie, once just a piece of clothing, now carried her subtle warmth and the memory of her lingering gaze. I found myself replaying her movements, her gestures, the way her eyes had briefly held mine longer than necessary. There was something about her, confident, self-assured, yet undeniably vulnerable, that drew me in more than I expected. Over the next few days, I noticed small ways she had entered my thoughts. I remembered the slight quiver in her voice when she laughed nervously, the way she hesitated before handing back the hoodie, as if holding on to the moment a little longer. I wondered if she had felt the same pull I did, that quiet curiosity that made every glance between us feel meaningful. When we next met, unexpectedly, of course, she had that same poised presence, but there was something softer in her eyes, a glimmer of openness I hadn't seen before. We sat across from each other, the casual setting of a coffee shop or quiet corner somehow magnifying the intensity of the unspoken. Our conversation began with the usual, mundane topics: work, errands, the trivialities of daily life. But beneath the surface, every word carried double weight, and every pause seemed to hum with potential meaning. I noticed the subtle vulnerability she allowed herself in the small things she shared: a fleeting complaint about a tough day, a story about an old friend, a quiet memory that made her smile with a hint of sadness. Each revelation, no matter how minor, drew me closer emotionally. I wanted to reach across the table and offer reassurance, comfort, or simply the warmth of being present. But I held back, aware of the delicate balance between attentiveness and overstepping. Her gestures fascinated me. The way she unconsciously brushed her fingers along the edge of her coffee cup, how she tucked her hair behind her ear with deliberate care, the faint curl of her lips when a memory struck her, all of it spoke to a depth I was eager to understand. I found myself observing, silently cataloging, feeling the slow pull of fascination mixed with admiration. At one point, our hands almost touched on the table. I felt the warmth of her skin, the unspoken invitation in the brief, hovering proximity. She didn't withdraw, just let the moment linger, as if testing boundaries and curiosity at the same time. It was subtle, entirely safe, yet heavy with unspoken connection. Internally, I wrestled with my own hesitation. She was older, experienced, confident in ways I was still discovering. The age difference, once an abstract thought, now felt real in the pause of our interactions. But what dominated that awareness was not doubt, it was fascination, the magnetic pull of emotional intimacy I hadn't anticipated. By the time we parted that day, I realized that curiosity had shifted into something more profound, a desire to know her, to understand her, to be trusted by her. And the hoodie, now folded carefully in my bag, seemed a silent witness to this unfolding tension, a small, ordinary object imbued with extraordinary significance. The room, the street, the city outside, all seemed quieter now, more expectant, as if waiting for what was coming next. And I knew, in that moment, that this slow, careful dance between us had only just begun. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm, punctuated by the occasional text or call from her, brief, casual, yet threaded with subtle warmth. And then, inevitably, we found ourselves spending time together again. Not by grand gestures, not through planned events, but in small, ordinary ways that felt extraordinary in their intimacy. That afternoon, she came over under the pretext of helping me rearrange some furniture I'd been meaning to move. The task was mundane, yet the way she moved around my apartment made it feel almost cinematic. She brushed past me to reach for a lamp, and the faint contact of her shoulder against mine sent a ripple of awareness through me. I caught her smile when she noticed me flinch slightly, an acknowledgement of the tension, unspoken but mutual. We laughed together over trivial mistakes, a crooked picture frame, a rug that refused to lay flat. There was a playful rhythm to the moment, punctuated by teasing remarks and shared glances. Each laugh felt deeper than it should, a small revelation of how comfortable, and yet charged, the space between us had become. When she leaned to straighten a vase, her hand brushed mine again, this time deliberately, lingering just a heartbeat longer than necessary. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. As we worked, we shared stories of our lives, our choices, our regrets. The conversation turned from practical to personal with remarkable ease. She spoke softly about a memory, her eyes reflecting both warmth and a trace of sadness. I found myself leaning closer, drawn in not by the content of her words, but by the way she said them, the subtle inflections, the quiet pause, the small sigh that spoke volumes. At one point, we paused to admire the finished arrangement. She stood closer than before, just behind me, her warmth brushing against my arm. I could feel the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the familiar aroma of my apartment, a combination that seemed to anchor the moment in an almost intoxicating intimacy. Our eyes met in the mirror across the room, and we laughed softly at the shared reflection, each of us acutely aware of the closeness without speaking a word. Later, we settled on the couch under the guise of taking a break, the soft fabric of a shared blanket draped over our laps. Her hand moved near mine, fingers almost touching as we reached for mugs of tea. Every minor movement felt deliberate, weighted with meaning. Even sitting quietly side by side, the subtle shift of her body closer to mine spoke louder than any words could. I realized, in that moment, that these shared routines, the laughter, the casual touches, the ease of conversation, were weaving an emotional tapestry far richer than either of us had expected. It was in the mundane, in the ordinary, that the intimacy between us deepened. Each brush of fingers, each laugh, each glance became a thread in the slow, deliberate pattern of something unspoken yet undeniably real. When she finally stood to leave, there was a hesitation, a pause in the doorway that neither of us acknowledged aloud. But the warmth of the afternoon lingered, the memory of shared closeness embedding itself in my chest, a quiet reminder that connection was not always sudden or loud, it could grow, steady and profound, in the space between ordinary moments. The more time I spent with her, the more impossible it became to ignore the way my thoughts revolved around her. Each encounter carried a growing weight, a subtle pull that made ordinary moments feel charged with anticipation. By the time we met that evening at my apartment, it was no longer just a casual visit, it was a quiet reckoning of emotions we had both been skirting around. She arrived, as always, poised and graceful, yet there was a softness in her eyes I hadn't noticed before, a flicker of hesitation that mirrored my own. The hoodie, the one that had brought her here weeks ago, lay folded on the couch, now a silent witness to everything between us. I noticed her glance linger on it, then up at me, and I realized we were both weighing the unspoken question: how much of this were we willing to acknowledge? We settled into the familiar comfort of my living room, sitting close enough that the warmth of her presence pressed gently against me, yet far enough to maintain the delicate tension. The conversation started with trivialities, a warm-up before the real talk. But the silences were different this time, heavier, pregnant with unsaid words. Her hand brushed against mine as she reached for a cup of tea, and neither of us pulled away. The faint tremor in her fingers betrayed a nervousness I mirrored in my own pulse. Finally, she spoke, softly, almost as if testing the air. "Enjoy spending time with you. More than I expected." Her voice was steady, yet carried a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I swallowed, acutely aware of the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, the way her hair fell in a perfect curve across her collarbone. "I feel comfortable with you," she added, hesitating, as though the words themselves were risky. I wanted to respond immediately, to bridge the gap with confession, but I paused, conscious of the age difference, the societal expectations, and the careful balance we had maintained. My heart beat faster as I finally spoke. "I feel the same. More than I can explain." My hand hovered near hers, uncertain whether to close the distance. She didn't move away. Instead, she let the space linger, letting the tension build like a quiet crescendo. Our eyes met, and everything else fell away: the hum of the city outside, the faint scent of her perfume, the soft warmth radiating between us. It was just the two of us, suspended in a moment of honesty and vulnerability. She shifted slightly, and our shoulders brushed, a small, deliberate contact that carried more meaning than words ever could. Then, almost instinctively, our hands found each other. Fingers intertwined, tentative at first, then more confident as the barrier between hesitation and desire softened. It wasn't just touch, it was a conversation in itself, a shared acknowledgement of curiosity, attraction, and mutual respect. We stayed like that for a long moment, simply existing in the closeness, letting the confession settle between us. There was no rush, no grand gesture, just the quiet understanding that we had crossed a threshold together. And in that pause, I realized that vulnerability could be beautiful, that hesitation could be intoxicating, and that the slow unfolding of something real was far more powerful than any impulsive declaration. By the time she left, there was a lingering warmth, a quiet electricity in the space between us, and the unspoken promise that what had begun in hesitance could grow into something profound. The evening began like any other, but there was an unspoken electricity in the air as she arrived. The city outside hummed quietly, distant and indifferent, while inside, the space between us seemed charged, intimate, and impossible to ignore. Her presence was magnetic, poised yet soft, confident yet undeniably vulnerable, and every small movement drew my attention. We started with casual conversation, as if trying to maintain normalcy. But the words felt secondary, almost unnecessary. Our glances lingered longer than before, and the subtle brush of her hand against mine felt deliberate, purposeful. Each small contact, each accidental touch, was amplified, a quiet drumbeat building toward something inevitable. Then it happened, a small accident that changed everything. She reached for a book on the edge of the shelf, lost her balance slightly, and I instinctively moved to steady her. My hand found her waist, her body pressing lightly against mine. She steadied herself, laughing softly, but didn't step back. The brief, instinctive closeness sent a jolt through both of us, breaking down the last layer of hesitation we had been holding. We froze for a heartbeat, eyes locking in that intimate, unguarded gaze that revealed more than words ever could. Her chest rose and fell against my arm. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the subtle rhythm of her heartbeat. Time seemed to stretch, the ordinary sounds of the apartment fading into silence. In that suspended moment, everything became clear. This wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was desire, gentle but undeniable. She smiled nervously, and I could see the same mix of excitement and vulnerability in her eyes that mirrored my own. I didn't mean to," she started, but the words dissolved, unnecessary in the quiet intensity of the space between us. I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers, and the simple contact spoke volumes: reassurance, understanding, mutual acknowledgement of what was growing between us. For the first time, we allowed ourselves to truly inhabit the moment. We leaned into each other naturally, shoulders touching, faces close, breaths mingling almost imperceptibly. Her warmth pressed against me in a way that was grounding, comforting, and electric all at once. The tension that had been building for weeks, the lingering glances, the brush of fingers, the unspoken words, culminated in a quiet, perfect intimacy. We talked then, openly and honestly, about our feelings, our hesitations, and the possibilities ahead. There was no rush, no grand declarations, only sincerity and vulnerability. Her head tilted slightly against my shoulder as she spoke, a gesture of trust that made my chest tighten. Every pause, every soft laugh, every brush of her hair against my arm deepened the connection, making the emotional stakes feel tangible. By the time she left that night, we both understood the truth of what had begun. The slow burn had ignited, not in a flash of passion, but in a series of small, meaningful gestures and moments of courage. Our hearts were full, our longing acknowledged, and the unspoken promise lingered. Whatever came next, we had reached a turning point, together, in the quiet intensity of shared vulnerability. If you want, I can now expand Keynote 7, Resolution, giving the story a YouTube-friendly, emotionally satisfying conclusion, with lingering warmth and closure. Should I do that next? You said. Expand Keynote 7, 500 words. ChatGPT said. Absolutely. Here's an expanded version of Keynote 7, Resolution, around 500 words, giving the story a warm, emotionally satisfying, YouTube-friendly conclusion. Part 7, Resolution, expanded. The next day felt heavier than usual, though nothing had changed outwardly. The apartment seemed quieter, almost hollow, without her presence. Even the hoodie, folded neatly on the couch, seemed to carry a memory of her warmth, her laughter, and the quiet moments we had shared. I found myself tracing the fabric with my fingers, remembering how her hands had brushed mine, how her scent lingered faintly in the folds, and how a simple piece of clothing had become a conduit for intimacy and connection. When she arrived again that evening, there was a palpable tension, a mixture of anticipation and hesitation. She held the same calm confidence, but her eyes betrayed a softness, a vulnerability that matched my own. There was a moment where we simply looked at each other, words unnecessary, the space between us charged with everything unsaid. I didn't think I'd feel this way, she admitted quietly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The small gesture drew my attention as it always did, graceful, delicate, yet completely natural. I felt the familiar pull of wanting to reach for her, to close the gap between us, to let the physical closeness mirror the emotional one that had been building for weeks. We spent the evening together, moving slowly through the familiar routines that had become our shared rhythm. A cup of tea in the quiet living room, our shoulders brushing as we reached for the same book, laughter spilling softly across the space between us. Every touch, every glance, every pause felt intentional, meaningful, charged with unspoken acknowledgement of our connection. The slow-burn intimacy that had grown over time now settled into a comfortable warmth, like sunlight on bare skin. At the moment of parting, she hesitated at the doorway. Neither of us wanted to break the spell of the evening. Then, almost instinctively, she stepped closer, pressing a gentle cheek kiss against my temple. Her hand lingered in mine, a soft squeeze that said everything words could not: trust, affection, and the quiet promise of more to come. I felt her warmth linger as she pulled back slightly, a smile that carried both certainty and playful mischief, leaving me breathless in the quiet aftermath. When she finally left, the apartment felt emptier yet full at the same time. The hoodie remained on the couch, imbued now with memory, intimacy, and the unspoken bond that had been forged in small gestures, lingering touches, and shared vulnerability. I ran my fingers over it one last time, aware that something significant had begun, something neither rushed nor forced, but steady, deliberate, and deeply human. In the quiet that followed, I realized that this connection, age gap, slow burning, and unexpected, had already changed me. It had taught me the value of patience, the beauty of vulnerability, and the subtle power of shared moments. And while the future remained unwritten, there was a clarity in the present. We had found each other, fully and without pretense, and that was enough. The slow burn had reached its peak, not in dramatic gestures, but in quiet affirmation. And in that moment, I understood, some connections don't need words to define them, they only need presence, trust, and the willingness to let intimacy grow, one gentle moment at a time. If this slow burn story warmed your heart, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more age gap romances and heartfelt stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection that grew quietly, one small moment at a time? And hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that makes your heart skip a beat.